Okay. All right, so we will call this meeting to order. This is Advocacy Issues and Programs. So we will start with introductions. I am David Shad. I am the Chief Programs Officer here at the Hope Center.
Sherry Pennington, Mountain Top.
Billy Love, member of the board.
Tracy Cody, Bluegrass Care Navigators.
Kylie Starcher, New Beginnings Bluegrass.
Marty Jones, Mediation Council.
Marietta Cabello, Regional Center.
Diane Fleet, 317.
Eric Dominguez, Lexington Rescue Mission.
And Lexington Library.
Elizabeth Fox, Bluegrass Care.
Darrell Watkins, Arbor Youth.
Janelle Laws, Arbor Youth.
I'm Shalice, Independence Place.
I'm Terry Jo Dion, Pacific Christian Church.
Chris Primo, New Life Days.
Marissa Webb, Continuing Care Coordinator.
Jeff Herron, Manager, LFUCG, Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention.
Adam Kuhn, Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention.
And I'm Amber Cronin, the Hope Center Director of Homeless Services.
And back here.
Oh,
What's your name?
Anita Nellis, BCTC.
Okay. And Josh, do you want to introduce yourself?
Introduction, miss.
Josh McKinley, Executive Director of Public Services.
All right, so now we give you a minute to review the minutes from last time. If there are no need for corrections, we need a motion to approve those. Okay, Chris makes a motion to approve. Any second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I don't know why you would oppose the minutes, but surely,
Controversial subject.
surely somewhere someone's opposed them. Yeah,
She's intrusive.
just to be the one person.
I imagine most people don't even read them.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to new business, and we'll turn it over to Jeff.
All right, so we kind of touched on this in the meeting that we had last week, but I know we have different audiences at different meetings, so wanted to give some updates around things going on at the federal level. First of all, we had a while back spoken about some proposals within the federal fiscal year budget that could change a lot for us in terms of funding. Specifically, we were being told that there was a possibility of the Continuum of Care, or COC program, and the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS program, or HOPWA. We're potentially looking at being consolidated with the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG program, and then all of those being subject to ESG regulations. Probably the biggest impacts that would have would be in terms of things like permanent supportive housing would essentially no longer be available under federal funds. All rental assistance was at that time proposed to be capped at 2 years maximum. So our concern was things like the fact that we do currently have several permanent supportive housing programs funded through COC program, and that typically those are serving really high acuity individuals with patterns of chronic homelessness, by definition also having disabilities. And so that would severely limit what we were able to do to support individuals, and we had concerns that at the same time, there were significant cuts proposed to things like the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And essentially, we would not only lose the ability to serve people for longer than 2 years with rental assistance, but we would also have fewer resources within the community to transition people onto if they needed long-term or ongoing rental support. So thankfully, the version of the budget that ended up getting through did not make that change at this time, and the programs are staying separate programs. So that is something that is fortunate, but still something that we should understand that this administration has clearly messaged their intent or their standpoint. And I think we would be smart to continue to plan around, if that was to become a reality in the future, how would we pivot to be able to best serve our population and keep people stable in housing. Additionally, there were going to be some proposals about elimination of CDBG funding as well as home funding. CDBG funding did end up getting through in the budget, and that is something that does support some of our programs. Typically, it's a very small amount of programming for homelessness because overall there's a service cap of 15% of our local award being able to be dedicated to services. But we still do see some support going to our homeless response system. New Beginnings, for example, would have a housing navigator that's funded through that program, and Arbor Youth has frequently received funding for their outreach center. So that too would have had impacts for us that we're glad that we didn't see come to fruition. Also, we had previously been told last year when we applied for our annual Continuum of Care funding that we were applying under a 2-year NOFO. So we were intending that we would not have to do an application this year, and the next competition would fall in 2026. However, we have since received an email notification that there is proposed to be a competition this year after all. That is a little bit disappointing for a few reasons. One, that is a very time-intensive process to develop that application. Continuums of Care essentially spend several months in the fall operating their competition with local providers and developing the collaborative application to frame that. It's usually a process that would start around July when the NOFO is released, and we usually are submitting our final application around October. And then there's a lot of development that goes on throughout the year that's tied back to that application. How are we developing strategies to address things like first-time homelessness, or to address chronic homelessness, or returns to homelessness? So it's something it's year-round work, and we were really excited about the opportunity of capacity building, what it could mean for our providers in this office if we didn't have to author that application every single year. It would give us an off year within those cycles to be able to really engage our membership more on development of strategies and policies, and not really just be focusing to continually run an application and a competition. With that notice, there was some language that clearly gave us some indicators of how things might change for the Continuum of Care program. One thing in particular was they made an announcement that there would be different project component types that were going to be eligible for agencies to apply for. They mentioned that they were going to again offer transitional housing as a component, but also something they've never done before, allow street outreach to apply for Continuum of Care funding. Also, within that notice, there was some priorities that were included. Some of that is things that are in clear alignment with our system already, like trying to address unsheltered homelessness. But there were also some things in that notice around trying to increase self-sufficiency and potentially introduce things like work requirements for participants. So that aligns with what we've been doing in terms of having conversations about increasing earned income for participants to ensure that they would have something to fall back on in case we did see something like a 2-year limit on rental assistance. And finally, there was also some encouragement specifically mentioned to engage faith-based groups and churches in the Continuum's work. Definitely we're open to that. Oftentimes we find that organizations that are more faith-based in orientation sometimes don't like to apply or pursue federal funds because there might be some limitations on things like how they can kind of spread their beliefs and what they are and are not able to do with participants. And that can kind of get into an area that can sometimes be a little bit gray, a little bit ill-defined, and make some people uncomfortable to apply for those dollars, just knowing some restrictions are there. Right now, we still have not heard any further word around a timeline for a competition. As I mentioned earlier, we would usually see an application that would start with a NOFO probably around July, definitely usually in the summer months, and we'd be ending in the fall. did a little bit of research and went back and looked. The application that I remember us having the latest timeline was the fiscal year 21 application. That was one that Polly and myself had submitted, and we had a late NOFO dropping in mid-August, which then resulted in a November 12th deadline for our application. So what we're kind of wondering at this point is, looking at our calendar that we are rolling up on September 1st, if we kept a similar timeline, we'd be looking at like late November for a submission. So if we push it much further, we're not even sure that we would see a process that could be feasibly completed within the calendar year. We'll definitely continue to keep you updated as to the process that we are instructed to follow, but we just don't know how to properly guide our agencies. I think all of our existing providers receiving COC funding should probably prepare and brace themselves that they may have to go ahead and do a renewal application this year. Just because that can be intensive work, I want you to kind of pencil it in on your schedules. And then for anybody that has an interest in coming into the COC program, you would potentially need to be prepared to move quickly. So it might be a good idea if you have been thinking about pursuing this opportunity, but haven't done so, and this was maybe going to be the year, you may want to be proactive in having conversations with our office so that we can kind of advise you as to just some general information about the Continuum of Care program. We would have some materials like a webinar that we did last competition to try to recruit and attract new applicants that would give a lot of overview information. But we're also happy to just set up a time to answer direct questions for those that are potentially considering application. I think what makes that whole puzzle harder to put together is also, if we're trying to shift priorities and potentially introduce new program types, we would also need to understand if we are, as a community, eligible for additional funding beyond just our annual renewal demand. Would there be any new dollars that would be available that would not mean that we have to reallocate? For example, we've struggled as a system to find sustainable sources to fund street outreach. David has done an amazing job of pumping out grant applications left and right over the past year to try to supplement our funding for street outreach and find more sustainable sources. And we would love to see an opportunity to fund some of that through the COC program, but we wouldn't want to do it at the expense of housing dollars that we currently fund. As we know, outreach is a very effective tool, especially in reaching those who are least likely to seek assistance for themselves. But we can't outreach our way out of homelessness. People have to have somewhere to go. That includes short-term or interim options like shelter or emergency housing, and it also includes permanent housing. So we really would be in a tough spot because we would have to consider really closely how we are going to evaluate our programs, what our thresholds might be for reallocating funds from a program, and hopefully we would see a NOFO that would include additional dollars. Now, I'm also not going to complain if they just quietly scale back and just don't do a competition. Part of me thinks that some of these delays are in relation to policy changes that they're trying to make and maybe didn't have enough time to implement before a NOFO can be released. For example, we were expecting an update for our homeless management information system, or HMIS standards, for this year. Generally, that is released in the summer. We have some comment periods where providers and vendors can go back in COCs and give feedback, and it might change what is in the final version of the standards. As of right now, HUD has not publicly released the HMIS data standards for fiscal year 26, which are scheduled to go live on October 1. Our vendor has had access to some of that so that they can begin working to make changes within the system to align it with those standards. And they did have it available on their portal for us to view at one time, and we did save it before it disappeared. But we are told that there may be additional changes and this might not be the final version. Some of that, as you know, was really rooted in some of the priorities that this administration has, specifically doing things like moving away from gender as a field within our system and substituting it with a sex field that would be based on biological sex. And a lot of it definitely appears to be more language focused. And so at this point, we hope to be able to give you advance notice of HMIS data standards changes, but there is a possibility that we'll have a really short time frame and may not be able to give you much advance notice. We are hopeful that it won't result in a significant shift to any of the data collection or data entry that you're currently doing, but definitely we will work to, as timely as possible, get you materials that would alert you and spotlight what changes are going to go into effect. And then provide support tools. Like, for example, we typically do sample data collection forms that can be used for different program types that would help you collect the information that's required for your project type and ensure that you're in compliance. So we will do that. I just don't know if we will be able to have everything to you ready to go. We still don't know what's in it. And then finally, and perhaps kind of most concerning, you're probably aware of a recent executive order that is largely aimed at addressing homelessness. That is largely being framed as a public safety act. It is calling for there to be greater flexibilities in our ability to get persons civilly committed. And it's also calling for us to make policy shifts, for example, that we would not be able to operate on a housing first model. Communities operating with a housing first approach would potentially be at jeopardy of having funding retracted. Housing first is the predominant model, as most of you in the room know, that we have been led to embrace for the greater part of 10 years now. And that would simply be an approach that we house persons first and then wrap around intensive supports to help them address any additional issues that might be intermingled with their homelessness. So if they are, for example, a person with serious mental illness, they do not have to participate in treatment to obtain housing. But what research would show us is that if we provide housing and stability, things like their symptoms naturally decrease, and that over time, with case management supports and consistent progressive engagement from a supportive service team, they were likely to choose things like treatment for themselves. Same kind of thing with substance use. It would require that for persons to be served with these dollars, they would have to agree to participation in treatment. I think we all know, if we've done direct service work, that things like recovery tend to be most effective when people choose that for themselves and have a voice in what recovery looks like for them. Also, harm reduction is going to be another model that is going to be targeted under this executive order. There would be some changes to what kinds of harm reduction activities that funded programs could implement. And that could have some change in terms of the safety that is available to some individuals that we know realistically are not prepared yet to choose recovery and end their use. And it may just take away some of the tools that are available to them. Oftentimes through harm reduction, we're able to do things like give people fentanyl testing strips or other items that help make it so that if they do choose to use, they can do so in a much safer way. Unfortunately, very shortly after that executive order, we had a couple of incidents here in Lexington that my fear is are going to cause the public to view this population with quite a bit of stigma. I'm sure, as you probably have heard, there was a double homicide that occurred at the North Lexington Public Library involving both a perpetrator and victims who were all unhoused. And then about a week later, we had an incident downtown where a gentleman attacked a woman who was going to lunch. And that particular event seemed to get a lot of news coverage. Both of those incidents I've seen shared by news outlets outside of Lexington or even outside of the state. I will say you probably don't want to go into the comment section. There was a lot of calls for bringing the National Guard, very, very inhumane statements towards the individuals who are accused of these crimes. I understand a need for us to try to increase safety and make sure that all of our residents in our community have safety and can enjoy our city. But we definitely don't want to see things unfold here the way that they are currently unfolding in Washington, D.C. The federal government has taken control and is making a widespread push to remove the homeless from Washington, D.C. We've seen some pretty dramatic footage of camps just whole-scale bulldozed. A lot of people giving interviews about losing all of their belongings. Definitely not exactly an approach that we would like to see for this population. I want to make sure that I am clear, as our mayor has released a statement about our efforts to increase and address downtown safety issues through expansion of things like street outreach. We do not want to be the community that's doing what Washington, D.C. is doing. So I want you to have my assurance that I'm doing everything to spin that in a positive direction that helps us to obtain more resources and is still largely in alignment with the principles and the values that we've operated with. So for example, we are going to do a expansion of street outreach to have a downtown specific team. In the interim, Hope Center's team is doing a lot of efforts there in downtown. So far, what that has looked like for us is pairing their outreach team with a point of contact from police. We've been fortunate enough to be working with Officer Dawn Norden. Many of you might know her, a neighborhood resource officer who works a lot with this population. So definitely we got our first choice of person who we know is going to be compassionate, is going to always pursue criminalization as a last resort. They've also been going out with our paramedicine team in conjunction, so we're able to offer a pretty comprehensive package. We have somebody from law enforcement that if there is something that is appropriate for us to pursue from that angle, we can. But we're largely steering things towards interventions. We have the outreach team that can work with individuals on things like obtaining critical documentation, making a housing plan, trying to get into housing, whether that be market housing, income-based housing, or assessing them for resources from our coordinated entry system. Paramedicine would obviously have the ability to really address more complex healthcare needs, would have additional social workers on their team, and then just all together with that package, I think that we're able to address things from mental health, substance use, medical issues, and that's how we're going to continue to pursue that. At the same time, I'm also going to be trying to push for additional resources to help us with both interim and permanent housing, trying to figure out what kind of scale that we're going to be able to provide with money we currently have available through the Innovative and Sustainable Solutions Fund, and what other dollars might be available to us from the local government. Realistically, we know that even if the shelter study and the task force were to come together and recommend a shelter today, we're probably looking at a couple of years for acquisition, rehab, or construction, and being able to open that shelter. So we would need some things like the ability to maybe do some short-term hotel stays if there's an immediate need to get someone relocated from the streets, but we're also going to need permanent housing options. So my hope is that in the near future we'll be able to issue some RFPs to invite proposals for things like short-term hotel stays or short-term shelter operation or permanent housing providers. So definitely our housing providers, I've been in touch with a couple of you to help get some information just to kind of project some budgets. Be in communication with me because hopefully we'll be able to put out some funding that people could apply for. I see that also as an opportunity if we are introducing some local housing dollars that maybe we can have some flexibility around things like some HUD's requirements. Obviously, per HUD policy, permanent supportive housing requires that someone meet chronic homeless status, so we could potentially be able to more quickly connect persons that don't have that chronic homeless status but do have that high acuity of need with the right level of resource. And we just would have a little bit more flexibilities in some of the policies. For example, knowing the challenges within our local housing market, that potentially could be a project that we might allow to pay rents over fair market rent values, or maybe have some funds to do landlord incentives. We can do some things that are more effective for our local community and local market. Questions about what's going on at the federal level. Definitely think that there's going to be some items that we're going to bring back to this committee as we know more. For example, I don't necessarily think that things like having a pathway to get somebody connected with mental health care, if they're not desiring it, is entirely a bad thing. I think what really matters is the execution. So as we learn more about what this means in practice, there might be some items that this group needs to come back and talk about. We might need some advocacy campaigns. We might need to develop some tools for social media to help reach more people. We might need to do drives to get people to contact their elected officials and request that they consider a certain vote or a certain policy. So wanted to introduce that here now, but I'm definitely open to questions and we'll answer whatever we can based on available information. Yeah.
My name is Anthony Caldwell. I am in the process of trying to start a nonprofit to help the homeless with a permanent homeless shelter that needs to be done before winter time. I have a property here and all this. It would be ideal for Lexington. It would be a part of, to help the economic situation that's going on, help the homeless with families, with women and children, kind of cooperate everything, have a place that they can work there, stay there. I think this would be beneficial to Lexington. I just wanted to bring that up. It's like my third meeting I went to. You know, Jeff, we talked before.
Yeah.
For this. So, I mean, I think we're very, I sent the mayor an email and told him what, told Mayor Linda what was going on with this, and this would be an ideal. I think this used to be the old Congress Inn back in the 70s, I believe.
Okay. I believe that was on a list already that the city has looked at for locations for potential shelter development. We have a list that right now I know is over 30 properties without even looking at anything that we have looked at. Generally speaking, the zoning that emergency shelters are allowed in is extremely limited, but we have scouted for anything that would have that potential use and would be available and would have a sufficient kind of size parcel. And we have looked at those that would have that right by zoning by right or by conditional use. We are trying to narrow that down to things that we think are extremely feasible. And we are looking at any property that LFUCG would own, as well as properties that we would not own. For winter, we would not, as a city, be able to go ahead and get a permanent shelter approved, implemented, and available by winter. We are working on a strategy for winter. That contract should hopefully be going to our council very soon, and we'll be able to share additional details. But we are looking at using an LFUCG property for a temporary winter shelter to expand, and we anticipate that we're going to have to do a similar approach for another 1 to 2 years as we work towards a permanent shelter. But that location, I can say, is definitely on a list that we have looked over. I don't think anything on that list is necessarily fully out of the picture yet. That wasn't necessarily at the top of the list, but it's also not out of the realm of possibility. In terms of if a nonprofit wanted to pursue something, obviously they're not bound to the same administrative processes that I am as the city. So definitely nonprofits may have greater flexibility in terms of how quickly they could get something pulled together. I definitely would think though that it would be a good idea for nonprofits, faith groups, churches, community members that do have an interest in trying to support shelter need. We could always be looking at smaller scale projects, things that might be available for temporary expansion, like during extreme weather. I definitely think until the point that we have permanent shelter that's adequate, anything that people can contribute in that area is extremely helpful. Other questions around current federal policy changes?
Jeff, I sent you a copy of the harm reduction guidelines that SAMHSA sent out, if you want to circulate that to everyone.
Yeah.
We have a couple of SAMHSA grants, and they sent out instructions on what harm reduction things you can and can't do. So it may be useful for anyone preparing for like COC funding, if we do have those applications, to know what you can't do.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is going to be just languages that are narratives, for example. We're going to have to definitely find all instances of housing first and come up with some other terminology that we feel comfortable using. I think, we should not be so willing to just throw away evidence-based practices and values that we've held deeply. I think we just need to find new ways to approach them and to message them. I think a lot of this has to do with people misconceiving that housing first equates housing only, and not understanding that those supports are available and part of the package and are consistently offered to individuals. It just doesn't have a requirement for entry to housing. I'll be glad to share that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Next up, we have Chris, who wanted to talk about targeted youth support. Just a little bit of background. Last week in our program performance, was it last week? 2 weeks ago? Sometime in our program performance meeting, the issue of the increasing amount of 18 to 24 population came up, and Chris brought up some ideas about ways that our homeless community can support youth in this age range, and wanted to bring that up in this meeting, so I'll let you talk further about this.
Okay. So first, I just want to give some background on myself. My name is Chris Primo. I've been working with the homeless population for almost 15 years now. I worked at Arbor Youth Services for 11 years. I did volunteer work with other organizations before that, and now I'm at New Life Day Center working with all age ranges. And I've been a little more concerned recently about the 18 to 24-year-old population. With with Arbor Youth Services losing a lot of their capacity, this kind of means that those kids have to go to other shelters, where as the Hope Center only serves male identifying individuals, and then the Salvation Army only serves female identifying individuals, and some families. Is anybody from the Salvation Army here?
I believe that they have a reception scheduled for Mary, who's retiring during the same window.
Cool. All right, Mary. My biggest concern is that there's not individualized case management or supports for 18 to 24-year-olds at the shelter level for all the shelters in Lexington. I know that there is case management available, but I really feel like 18 to 24-year-olds need people that are specifically experienced in dealing with 18 to 24-year-olds. 18 to 24-year-old homeless youth face unique challenges that differ significantly from chronically homeless adult populations. This transitional age group is still developing cognitively, emotionally, and socially. Housing them with general adult shelter population often exposes them to harmful influences, exploitation, barriers that can worsen their circumstances instead of helping stabilize them. Creating separate developmental appropriate shelter spaces and case management with trained staff, supportive supervision, and non-clinical environments is essential to breaking cycles of homelessness and fostering independence. The biggest issue I find with putting them in general population or not having specific case management for them is that, well, one, they're still young and their frontal lobes haven't even finished forming, which if you don't know what that means, it means that they're vulnerable to risk-taking behaviors, they're vulnerable to not having clear judgment, and they're more vulnerable to not being able to regulate their emotions. So being in a broad shelter population with multiple age ranges can lead to things like early drug use exposure, exposure to more chronic homelessness, idealizations. I really feel like we should probably take a step back and try to figure out how we can get targeted case management for these individuals in all of our shelters, not just Arbor Youth Services. They could only have 11 kids there at the moment, I believe, and there are 133 that passed through the Hope Center last year, and I'm sure that number is going to increase now, which is a little concerning and scary. And I feel like having a dedicated case management assigned to these kids would help their success go a long way. Staff should be trained in de-escalation, trauma-informed care. Anytime you're dealing with an individual that, a lot of which, honestly, I was reading and it stated that most mental illnesses start to peak around the age of 20. So if you can imagine being 20 years old, not having any ability to manage your risk-taking, and also developing schizophrenia, and being homeless, like that's a lot to deal with. And then you add drug use to that, it just exasperates everything. I can't say that word. That it heightens everything. And it puts them in a position to not be able to succeed. Everybody talks about ending homelessness, but we can't end homelessness if we don't tackle it where it starts. And a lot of it starts with these 18 to 24-year-olds. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
So definitely we wanted to invite Chris. This was something that kind of came about organically. We want to increase the continuity through our different committees. We want to make sure that as we identify issues within something like our Program Performance and Evaluation Committee, oftentimes we're not talking about things that impact just one project. So it's not going to be just Arbor Youth talking about their outreach center, that they're the only ones that struggle with a particular issue. And so we wanted to open up that conversation to see if there is an appetite for there being something like a work group or committee that would be working to better address youth homelessness. There's a lot of different options for how we could pursue that. Obviously, one would be some targeted case management. But we could also be working on a broader solution or strategy for this population. Chris referenced things like shelter spaces, so as we move forward in trying to develop additional shelter, one thing that we're advocating for is more of a campus-style approach. So how can we carve out some space within that setting that would be more dedicated to this population, more developmentally appropriate for this population? As we look at additional permanent housing, how can we maybe make additional resources available to this population, whether through housing programs or additional committed things like vouchers? And what kind of strategies can we potentially implement without even having additional resources at our disposal? We can work towards that, but what are things that we can do in the here and now? Can we run some routine reports within our HMIS system to help identify and outreach to youth that are 18 to 24 to make sure that if they do present outside of Arbor Youth and maybe they're going to the Hope Center or the Salvation Army or the Rescue Mission, that maybe we have opportunities to go ahead and connect them with someone. We could fund case management that might sit with one agency but follow individuals where they're identified. We could potentially look at strategies to capitalize on existing case managers and better equip them to be able to effectively case manage this population. So this is really kind of just a starting point. We would love input from the group in terms of if this is something that you'd like to see a work group for or you'd like to participate in, and what might be some strategies or ideals of things that we might pursue as resources.
I think that, I know that a lot of the bigger shelters have more funding. I know that's a broad statement. I'm sorry, David. I think honestly, either having someone that is a case manager for all 18 to 24-year-olds or having someone that even from another agency that's a case manager for 18 to 24-year-olds, I don't think that's a bad idea. It doesn't necessarily have to reside with one, like Jeff said, with one agency. Even like, I was like, I would even volunteer my time to go to the Hope Center to connect with these kids because I connect with them at the New Life Day Center, a lot of them actually, and way more than there used to be because they all know me. And so they end up there and that's not the greatest space for them. Like I love the day center, but it's not appropriate for 18 to 24-year-olds. It's just, there's a lot of drug use, literally within days of them being there, they're trying Serenity and doing things that they wouldn't normally have done to self-medicate, and that is really hard to watch.
So how would I'm sorry, Jeff.
Go ahead.
How would you suggest that the case manager, if we had a dedicated one for them, how would they be different or differently trained than the case managers that exist?
Well, I feel like when you're dealing with youth, you're dealing with a population, like I said before, that doesn't have the ability to regulate emotions. They don't have the ability to think clearly. The case manager has to be trained, well, one, in de-escalation, two, and targeted case management, trauma-informed care, all those things. They have to be able to meet the youth where they are and remember that you're dealing with not only an 18 to 24-year-old, but with 18 to 24-year-olds who experience trauma are actually typically mentally younger than even that. So you're not dealing with a full-grown adult that has cognitive ability to work out issues and problems. You're dealing with a mentally ill, sometimes drug-addicted 18 to 24-year-old who has none of those abilities. So it's definitely not just that, but also, just they need to be able to attack those issues instead of it just being a broad case management. It needs to be those specific issues.
So just listening. So if that was if we had a targeted case manager for that group, my mind's thinking, okay, we need one for elderly. I'm looking at them all the time. And then, and what you do, but I mean, we can, and then I start thinking about other groups, and I can say that we do already the training that all the ones you just mentioned, already for the caseworkers and the people that work there now. But what you said is accurate, but it's also the same way you would describe someone with a mental illness. Even though I don't know, they are coming into their mental illness around the age of 19 or 20, not really peaking. The peaking probably comes later, but I mean, we do work with, I'm just sort of playing devil's advocate. I'm saying that would be great, but I also think, well, then there are these other populations as well
No, I get
but.
We also
I-
had some discussion about the elderly population along with this at
Okay.
last week's meeting. There were some other examples that were shared of some challenges that people have with older adults that maybe are
Yeah.
different than what they're having with youth, but still kind of specific to the subpopulation.
Yeah, both of those ends of the spectrum have special needs and difficulties in the shelter.
Not to co-opt this, because I love this, the 18 to 24, and it is true, we did talk about seniors too, but as I was listening too, I was like, it might be really cool if we could do like a cross-train amongst agencies, because just like I probably need to be able to have a better expectation and understanding of what to expect for an 18 to 24-year-old that comes to Greenhouse 17, can I share domestic violence information to, you know, New Life Day Center, because you're crossing people that are having domestic violence. Like, can we do a kind of a cross-train of when you have mental health or substance use or 18 to 24, here's just how to adjust and amend your advocacy to kind of meet that need so you have realistic goals. And then maybe some real targeted stuff. If you have a lot of 18 to 24, you might just need a whole new section, you know, of stuff. We don't have a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds, but we do, you know, we do certainly have some. So I think such knowledge around this table, that, you know, and not domestic violence people don't just go to the domestic violence place, and kids don't just go to Arbor Youth, and, you know, so anyways, I think it could be really a cool thing. My other question though was, do 18 to 24-year-olds generally go to sort of the formal agencies for support? Like, do they usually go to Arbor Youth and the Hope Center, or are they going to more informal spaces? Do we need to connect with them in different spaces?
I think you definitely need to connect with them in different spaces, but they are going. Like I said,
100, yeah.
he had 133 on his roll, and then I don't know how many the Salvation Army has. At the day center right now, we have probably 15 to 16 that show up, you know, pretty much weekly. And I know Arbor has 11. So there's definitely, and probably more than that show up like, you know, offset. But, you know, there's definitely a need for something for these kids that is more targeted for their, just with the sheer population that, like this exploding of the Hope Center. And that's only male identifying individuals. That's not even counting anybody else. Like it feels like a high number to me.
So I always kind of approach these subjects very similar to the way that we would approach our work with one of our clients in terms of what are the short-term interventions that we can implement more immediately, and what are the long-term goals that we want to work towards. And I think, Diane, that you've given us a really good suggestion of a way that we can do something now. And we've talked about other areas where we would benefit for some peer learning opportunities. I think this is something that could be executed very easily with just a little bit of planning and preparation. I think, like Diane said, we have a lot of knowledge that sits within the COC. We have people that specialize in working with different populations. We even have people outside of our agencies that might be board members or community members who come to our meetings that also have specialties that they could potentially contribute to. And I think that would equip all of us to maybe better handle some situations and better engage our clients. And it could be youth, it could be DV, it could be the elderly, it could be SMI, and I could think of already for each one of those, a provider or a person who I think would have a lot to share. So I think that would be a great first step that we could take in terms of doing something. And then I think we could also look at some better opportunities to focus on some of these subgroups. Like, you know, we already have our standard housing triage or coordinated entry meetings, but what if we maybe occasionally had a meeting that really zeroes in on one particular population and tries to look at the resources that might be available and suit their needs?
Yeah.
Other ideas about how we might approach something like this, or if we think that's the right approach?
Not an idea, just more of a, how will you keep them engaged? Because I think a lot of times with that population there and considering all their needs, they don't, the maturity really isn't there to really see the extent of their problems. So, just how would you, and then, you know, I mean, is it like a survival, like we just meet those needs first? Like, cause a lot of that is that, like they need housing or they need, so do you handle that first and then move forward with other needs? Like, cause I don't really think you can address the mental health unless they are stable.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. I know at the day center, when I have a youth come into my office, it's basically I look at their whole situation and I address what I can fix first.
Right.
And then I start asking them what they feel needs to be fixed first. Because like sometimes, you know, like we need to make sure that it's client driven, even in their situation, because honestly, like Jeff said, if someone doesn't want help, they're not going to receive it. But if you can get them to start talking about the things that they need and the things that they want to change in their lives, then you can actually make a difference. And once those things start changing, it's kind of a snowball effect of oh, this is really possible. Because a lot of times, like we'll try to tackle the hardest thing first, and that kind of tends to wear them down. Like it discourages them, it gets them frustrated, it gets me frustrated. Like it, you know, taking one little bitty step at a time and attacking like I had a client one time come in and I said, what would make you the happiest right this second? He was like, shorts that would fit. I was like, oh, I could fix that. I was like, I can do that right now. And that like led to our relationship being, you know, like, because I actually offered something that would fix the issue in his life right that moment. And I may not be able to, but I can definitely find someone in this room that can, like, even if I can't.
I could share. I have an example. I'm working with a young man that just recently got housing. He aged out of foster care, and he has that secured housing. The housing then flooded, and then he had to move to a different apartment on the same complex. And he called me multiple times in a week to ask what he should do or what he should say. And I just met this child in the middle of June, and he's coming back to me for more support. And I said, what do you think you need to do? Well, I don't know, Miss Terry Jo. I said, okay, well, who do you call there on the apartment complex? Who are you supposed to call? I need to call the manager. So giving them those little baby steps, that self-efficacy to go ahead and make that decision. And I do three-way calls with youth a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they're on the phone with me, I'll do a three-way call. If they're sitting with me, I'll put them on speakerphone and I will prompt them to do things. Because again, just having that pair of shorts that don't fall down all day long, it's not their fault that their shorts are falling down, right? We see that, kids do all the time, but sometimes it's not their fault. But being able to be that little stopgap of saying, okay, let's create a plan. What's most important? The same kid called me in July and said, I've got my apartment, but now my electric bill's due and my job fell through. 21 years old. He's trying to do everything he can do and use all of these resources. But that job fell through because he was blacklisted when he was 19 from working in that, you know, fast food restaurant. So those barriers just tend to come again and again and again, and building that muscle and that critical thinking ability, but you have to pour into them verbally and be in person. They have to have a connection and sit down with you to be able to build that muscle and be able to repeat what they need to do the next time if they have a problem they come upon that maybe they don't have a cell phone now and they can't call a case manager to ask for help. They need to be able to say, what do I need to do? And say that to themselves. Right. So I am all in on it. I'm all in for the youth. Because as a case manager in my past, I had 4-year-olds to 67-year-olds on my caseload.
Sounds like there's a couple of things that might be needed here. It sounds like housing-focused case management, but maybe just some like mentorship opportunities, just someone that a youth could ask basic life questions and get a little bit of support. That also opens a door for us to potentially bring volunteers into this and it not be solely a funded program kind of structure, but we could also tap into some other existing resources in our community. Making sure that we have some time to get to other items on the agenda. Do we feel like there is a need to look further at this area and develop some things? I will put out there that in the past, we've had a youth action board. Our youth action board has not been active for quite some time. That is a requirement of things like the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project funding. If we ever see another YHDP NOFO, not sure, because it was full of all kinds of inclusive language that I'm sure did not go over well with this administration. But it could be a step that we would potentially need for other opportunities anyway.
Jeff, I think from BCTC, you were going to say something?
Oh, it's okay. You all said most of the stuff. I just gonna say that it is a need, you know, because that's the big age, and you're right, they do need that mental health side to coincide. But they're so crisis driven. It is, they won't talk to you until there's a crisis. And then there's a crisis, and you help them through the crisis, and then they leave you alone, don't talk to you again to the next crisis. So the mentor thing, I think would be a good thing. And I think that the mentor needs to try to help them understand how if we deal with these things right before it becomes a crisis, because even in the crisis, the help is not immediate. That's the part that they don't necessarily understand. And if I worked at NECO, you know, so I've been in foster care, done a lot of different things. I actually grew up in foster care. A lot of people don't have parents, you know, so you almost have to kind of be a paid parent. You know, they need so much more than just what they can tell you, because they don't even know what they need. And that's the problem. They don't know what they need. They need someone to teach them all the stuff, because they're in college, right? They need a place to take a shower. They need a place to wash their clothes. They need someone who can teach them just a little bit about how to, you know, just, I need help. Even if they can phrase one question.
And hearing you speak also makes me think about things like we could tap into social work students. We could also look at maybe a university is a great setting to have some of these kinds of resources available.
I think you would need to bring the people off of the campus and bring them to them. Because so many of them feel inadequate. And they don't feel like they belong, and that people are going to be kind to them. So they kind of are hiding. Also, these kids have come through COVID. Most of them by themselves, you know, trying to sort that out. They're trying to succeed in a world that their friends are getting shot up. So there's a lot. We see a lot at the college, so I got a lot to contribute to a conversation about that. But we also have elderly students, you know, we have everybody there. So, but yeah, that's all I was thinking when I was sitting back here listening.
And I think that also brings up a good point. I mean, I think whatever we're doing, we need to involve the school system, because that's a huge issue on our end when we have high school students that come into the shelter. They have a lot of specific needs that are very difficult to meet. It's hard to do your homework. It's like everything is more difficult in the shelter, and then like transitioning into college becomes very difficult. So like there are so many different groups that could be part of this. In terms of volunteers, I think this seems like a group that you could fairly easily find people willing to volunteer for if you just had organization for that. And I don't want to do that.
Volunteers.
Yes, you do, definitely.
You gotta find somebody to train the volunteers.
That goes back to Diane's point about having some interagency trainings that we can do.
I want to share one thing quickly, because just a concern I have in this age group is we see people come through and they seem like they're being trafficked.
Yes,
And it's hard to get them to separate from each other or to ask too many questions, because then they'll just disappear. So I feel like that's an ongoing issue also that you're dealing with these kids.
Yeah, we see that, and I feel like it's almost a safety, they feel safer.
I know I've been presented with a couple of situations where I was like, I'm a little uncomfortable with the age gap here. I think there might be some power dynamics that are not healthy. So that's something where I think we also would need somebody at the table that has some expertise in that area. Would there be anyone that, this would be from anybody in the membership, would there be anybody that would want to make a motion that we actually move to start a work group? Is that something we want to pursue, or do we want to maybe continue discussions before we take that step?
I mean, I wanted to make the motion, but I was like, can I make the motion?
You can make a motion.
Okay, I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, and so your motion is to form a work group?
Yep.
Okay.
Who seconded that? Somebody did.
Diane.
Okay. We can definitely have some conversation offline about how to first approach that. If we schedule something outside of this meeting, if we want to kick it off at the next meeting. And then I will probably reach out to some of our providers to simultaneously work on going ahead and pulling together some peer learning opportunities for the near future. All right, making sure that we continue to get through our items. We were going to continue our discussions around increasing earned income. In your meeting packet, we went ahead and went through all of the Post-it notes from our activity last time, and we pulled together the more consistently mentioned items in each area. So we do, I think, have a small number of hard copies. If there's anybody that doesn't have a meeting packet, either didn't receive one or didn't print it.
Yeah, so I have 12 copies here. So you are gonna have to share with your neighbor, and then I think that potentially one of the best ways to continue this discussion is going to be and also this is on page 7 of your packet too. I am going to put up on the screen a matrix of high priority, low priority, and then feasible. And I think the best way to do this with the amount of time that we have is probably going to be passing around Post-it notes and actually think about the item that you're like, this would be great to pursue, but how feasible is it? How much of a priority is it within the context of the entire system? Which isn't to say that it's not a bad idea and it's not something that we should not be pursuing. I have some pins here too if you need them. Take a couple and then pass them down, Chris. In fact,
Of each color?
it could be any color.
I'm with you.
I just grabbed a bunch, and then that side can go ahead. And then I am going to, and if you have anything that you want to discuss, you can do that as well. So I'm going to put the matrix here, so that way we can have a sense.
I'm just passing.
I
That's
know.
all.
So as Marissa works to get set up, kind of just thinking back to what we said earlier about always kind of having more immediate short-term plans and longer-term plans. One of the things that I noticed that consistently came up in every area of that activity where we talked about earned income was barriers to transportation. And so thinking on that one, I thought back to, we had previously a transportation program that would offer access to a 1-year Lextran bus pass for individuals that were actively engaged in case management and that were homeless. By that we mean living in shelters or transitional housing, meeting the literal homeless definition. And that was actually a really low-cost program. And then going through the office, I found the printer that we used and got IT to install drivers on my new machine, and it still works. So we theoretically could potentially, we're trying to meet with Lextran, they said late August, so anytime now we should be meeting with them. We would essentially just have to purchase tap cards that could be programmed, and then we probably would want to revisit the structure of that program. There were some challenges for some of us that have been around for all of that. The biggest challenge we had was the availability of case managers, and some people wanted to come in and maybe not be so friendly to an agency because they wanted their bus pass and they wanted access to case management right now. And so that put a burden on agencies that maybe didn't have sufficient staff resources to be able to execute that. So I think there would be things that we would need to think through. But that's just kind of an example of how we can look at something that maybe we've done before, retool, something that's already available to us, and implement something that's very feasible. Now, is that my dream transportation program to solve things like this? No, not at all. But it's low-hanging fruit. It's something I know we can execute. It's low cost and something we could do quickly. So thinking around this list, We just want you to kind of help us tease out what are the things that are most important to us, what are the things that are feasible, and help us map those feasibility and availability, impact, help us understand what we should be pursuing.
And it could be multiple, as Jeff stated, right? It could be multiple items, right? We could have one regarding transportation, and then another item that we had identified as a barrier is heavy symptom burden, right? So potentially some tools, strategies, some programming that specifically addresses that. That may be not quite as feasible as bus passes, but is a high priority for the sustainability of somebody keeping income. So, and if you need more Post-it notes, I'm more than happy to give you more Post-it notes. We want to hear all those ideas and where you would rank them within our prioritization matrix.
We wanted you to be able to visually look at what the collective ideals were in each of those areas that we explored, just because there might have been something that maybe you didn't catch when we were in the meeting, maybe there's an idea that resonates with you now.
Are we on the Post-it going through just doing needed resources or things from all these categories?
It could be one or all or any of the above. If you have an item that really resonates with you in every single category, feel free to grab 4 Post-it notes or more. And then on the Post-it note, just be sure that you're indicating, right, like, this is really important to me and I think it's high feasibility, or I think that this may be less important, but it's also low hanging fruit. Just thinking through like some of the items on our list, so if we're looking at doctors for seniors,
No, I've got several here.
Chris?
Go back. Oh, do I need more Post-its?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Sorry.
Not that one.
Not that one.
What's going on?
Yeah, so on these post notes are going to be
My priority list on this list.
So like, Marissa, yes, you do, like, how you really know affordable?
Right, like more affordable, easy to, right, like a peer support, like, you know, peer-to-peer learning, that's something we can just organize that, that's pretty accessible. Versus, say, the creation of permanent housing, that is gonna take a couple more steps. Yeah.
Was this list made at the last meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Under barriers to income, when they say lack of motivation, do you think they mean overwhelmed?
Potentially.
Or is it two different things?
I mean, we don't always, these were from
Okay.
input from
Yeah.
individuals that we don't.
Similar to
know.
this activity,
Yeah.
we just had people write it on post-it notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
In the interest of time, I'm gonna give everybody about 5 more minutes, 5 to 7 more minutes. If anybody's done, feel free to hold them up. You can come back. And if you did not write, if you think where it would fit on this matrix, please be sure to do so.
Thank you.
I also have a whole stack of Post-it notes too, so if you turned yours in and you have more ideas.
Costco.
I loved it. Where it says, supplies you need, what we need you to do. I love it. Love it. It's bright and colorful too.
We'll give it about another 30 seconds or so for folks to keep looking over it. And then we're gonna have some community sharing of what folks indicated.
Okay, do I need to give them to you or not?
Yeah,
I did.
that's okay, you can hold on for the rest. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, sorry. We could have done it electronically, but we're so far away and
Yeah,
it's so little.
Really look at that.
I
Just-
know.
I was like, I can't.
I said we're not gonna do it electronically, it's too small, I
Very
think.
teacher friendly.
Yeah. I wear glasses and even I can't see it.
Maybe I should take a picture of mine so I can.
Yeah, of course. Feel free to. Okay, so I'm gonna start reading some off, just so that if you're still, of course, if you're still working on it, and just so that we can kind of see where we are. I think that this would be really helpful in determining programming regarding income support. So, some folks, and if I'm reading off yours and you feel like maybe I'm butchering it, feel free to let me know, either while I'm speaking or afterwards. I apologize in advance. So somebody indicated a high priority and feasible would be job coaches that are mobile, some mock training, bus passes, interview clothes, bikes. Some others that are high priority but maybe not quite as feasible, more affordable housing units and grants specifically for staffing. Some others that I saw here that were very important and maybe a little more difficult, low feasibility, was childcare. Some that indicated that was very important as well was resume building, application assistance, some through Jubilee Jobs, Goodwill, or others, which is great. A ranking, which I love to see, of most important, number 1 being transitional housing. So second time that we've seen that. Employer engagement, transportation at 3. Fear of losing benefits as 4. So maybe an educational piece of that. That probably would be low feasibility or high feasibility. And then consistency of mental health treatment. Some others I see that are high priority, lack of stable housing, and one that somebody indicated was highly feasible was vouchers for Uber or Lyft for transportation. A couple others, and then we will move along. High feasibility and high priority employer engagement. I think that's great. Bus passes and partnership in education. Another high priority, maybe low feasibility, but high priority, indicated here for transitional housing, qualified staff, and second chance employment. I want to be, in the interest of time, moving along, but are there any that maybe I didn't read yours, or one that you want to kind of say out loud what you think would be kind of fit within our matrix of one that you deem really important and want to talk through maybe the feasibility of it?
Goal here is to pick some short and long-term strategies that we can go ahead and start narrowing down our priorities and which directions that we really want to go.
So on the paper, when with transitional housing, it says for reentry, and I think it should be for anybody. And not just
We were just presenting what was gathered from the previous activity, so it can be something that we would open up, we're just using this as a starting off point, so we can do anything that we want in terms of how it's framed.
And a lot of the transitional housing on the post-it notes did not say for reentry. They just said transitional housing more broadly.
Sometimes people that attend are coming to us from a standpoint of the population that they might work with most frequently.
Well, I struggle most with when I have people I'm trying to find a shelter for. I try to find some way to get them into sober living because that's the easiest way for me to get somebody off the street besides a shelter. We shouldn't have. We need transitional housing, something like sober living for people who are not actively using. That's it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Anybody else want to?
May I touch on that? May I touch on that area? I think what needs to be is a low barrier, as if somebody's been banned from another shelter or they're not able to get any housing whatsoever, it doesn't matter if they can go through rehab or go through the situation process. I think they need to get stable first. I think that's the main thing. Let them get stable in some kind of housing of somewhat, so they don't feel like they're obligated to go do this. They can just rest and be able to be there. I think that would be more beneficial as a whole, compared to as homeless increases here in Lexington, Kentucky.
And I'd like to just tack onto that definitely a low barrier approach is what has been recommended per our shelter study and the work that the task force is going to carry forward.
I'd just like to add the temporary IDs would be really great. And also a better process to have eviction records expunged for individuals who are now doing the right thing. That maybe when they were 19 they messed up, and now they're almost 23, and they're in college and they can't get a lease. Like some kind of process that we can do. Everybody along, let's do it.
Two quick thoughts on that. One, I know it's not an immediate access to an ID, but are you familiar with the 1-year state ID that folks can get if they're homeless for free? Okay.
I just meant in lieu of that, they can't get to that, or they don't have access or funds for that. or transportation to do that, like a
So they
face sheet. I
can
use
get that
face sheets.
1 year state ID for free, no charge to them, they just have to have a
The
certain
transportation
form.
is all.
Yeah, the transportation to get them to do
Yeah.
it, yeah.
So I get a lot of best passes for that. Yeah, a lot of people come to me and they use the face sheet from the sober living houses that they're at. That a lot of the out of house youth don't have that, don't have anything else to say, this is who I am, but just saying this is who I am. And so, yeah, getting the documentations and things like that.
And then regarding eviction expungement, we are gonna have to target that as a state level intervention, because that would revolve around state law. So that's something that we definitely can pursue and should, but I think just in terms of mapping things out, we're gonna have to consider that it's gonna require things beyond what we control.
I have a question. My list was a little different than all the other things. My list, it pertained things like on-the-job training, lack of motivation, and in quotes, the bigger problem, fear of failure, scared to ask for help, and need for communication and conflict management skills. So I know we need shelter, we need all of these things, but in the meantime, can we be working on communications? Can we be working on the job training? Can we be working on mock interviews? Can we, because, yeah, you need a house, right? What we say, school a lot of times, hungry bellies can't learn. But at the same time, these are adults, and we have to, even though you don't have a place, that doesn't mean that you stop. You know, in the meantime, while we're working on this, can we be working on these things? So that's why my list is different. So that's my.
I appreciate that perspective.
So we've heard a couple times this thought about more mentorship, and it sounds like several of the things that you're kind of talking about. Kind of just speak to that ability of somebody to talk to, so kind of support. I know we've talked about that in the framework of 18 to 24-year-olds, but what about just in general with our population? What do we think about maybe trying to create some opportunities for those that do come to our organizations or to my office, and maybe they want to volunteer, they want to help, and we don't have like a specific need at that time? Maybe something that we could do is try to get some mentors that would actually sit down and spend some time with our population, and maybe that would help humanize them. Maybe that would help people to let go of stereotypes or misconceptions that they have. And then it might also make it easier on the training and organizing aspect, because we could do things like have group meetings where those mentors come together and we maybe go through and give them some resources or help navigate some of the issues or questions that are brought to them. But we don't necessarily have to do intensive training, because the bulk of the mission is that connection.
Right. Because if you work on these things, when you get a house, now maybe you know how to keep it. You know, if you work on how to talk to people, maybe you can keep your job. You know, so, but it can't start.
Well, like conflict resolution.
Yeah, there's things that are needed.
Peer support without the social issues.
Right, exactly.
I like that.
All right, well, thank you all. I think that this gives us a good groundwork for maybe what the priorities of the group are, right? Not just a big list of kind of brain dump, but really narrowing the focus of a type of program and the type of supports that we may need in order to pursue, obviously, our goal of increasing income.
We can try to now with these kind of this narrower focus, we can try to do some additional research and bring more ideals back to the group for implementation. With only a little bit of time left, I am going to go ahead and skip the 1915I RISE initiative update. Essentially, there isn't a lot of an update. On the back end, there's still a lot of work trying to align our mental health care system with the homeless response system to see how things like connection to the services can happen, whether someone's interfacing with mental health, how do they get connected with housing supports, and vice versa. So no significant updates other than if your organization's interested, definitely be reaching out to the state. We're glad to share that website address with you or an email contact so you can start that certification process. Marissa, did you have anything for lived experience engagement?
Just that the original intent was to, and pushing it back, was to hopefully have a sense of when the shelter study task force would be meeting. And as of current, they've not provided us with that update for when they expect to meet. But we're still trying to, the goal is that our next lived experience engagement meeting would be around that shelter task force, specifically with some action steps, so that way folks can go directly to that task force and speak about their priorities and their needs as well. So once we have that information, I will be absolutely sharing it out. I'm happy to just continue on since the next ones are me. We'll see if I can finish in 5 minutes. So the next item is the emergency shelter program standards. Those start at page 10 in your packet. And just some of the highlights of some of the changes that we made for those standards. A lot of the edits for our emergency shelter standards is going to be or ideally to strengthen the emergency shelter's ability to create eligibility requirements and then have methods of transparency around those requirements for program participants. We also strive to strengthen personnel training and support. And then we also really dove into client-driven case management. The edits and changes in these standards really came from a pretty robust, loose discussion of what our best practices are in emergency shelter, and then as well as maybe where some of the challenges that we're having, where some of the ways that we could improve. So we really strive to make those changes and edit them into this document. Like I said, those are going to be primarily around eligibility, personnel, service planning. And then the last item is a complete standard that we completely created, which is regarding client feedback as a standard. We've been implementing client feedback as a part of our standards incrementally. It's a part of our COC competition. And we just wanted it to be a little bit more explicit. So you will find that in the document as well. Are there any questions or concerns around our emergency shelter standards? We would need a vote on this. And this vote can come from anybody within the continuum of care.
So, motion to approve those standards. Josh makes a motion. Do we need a second?
We do. We won't need a motion when we go to the board, because that motion comes from
Gotcha.
committee.
Yeah. Any second? I'll second.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. So 10 pages later, starting on page 20. Oh, go ahead.
You can vote.
Oh, sorry.
Any questions or discussion prior to a vote? We're happy to go further into any of the changes that Marissa talked about. Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All right, now you can go.
Now move to page 20, and you'll see the street outreach standards. Some highlights from the street outreach standards are going to be some changes regarding eligibility. We expanded the intake assessment and what that intake assessment collects. We also strengthened our program enrollment and case management criteria. And then we also spoke a lot about within this meeting and then used language to hopefully strengthen our criteria around personnel. This includes, discussion and making it more in line with our rapid rehousing and our PSH personnel. Just to hopefully bring some, some criteria that's a little bit more about the robust training that case managers would receive and personnel would receive, whether they are peer support or case managers. We also changed and strengthened criteria around safety and client files. So I'd be happy to discuss that further and what some of those changes look like. But similar to emergency shelter program standards, we would need a motion that could come from the entire COC membership.
Any motions to approve?
I motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Discussion.
No.
All in favor? Okay. Any opposed?
And I did finish within 5 minutes.
That brings us to other issues in public sharing, and then we're kind of down to the wire, but we can gladly take a minute for any announcements.
A couple things, actually. First of all, I asked for a meeting with the 1915 folks this week because I really want to know how, like, the homeless world, how homeless providers are going to fit in. So
Yeah.
I asked for a meeting, and I've had some back and forth with them today. But I did the training online, and it's pretty minimal. But there is information on the state's website about like what you need, policy and procedure changes. It's pretty straightforward. But I'm going to try to set up that meeting soon, and then I'm happy to fill you all in.
I know Jackie for Mountain Comp is working on exploring that process for them, so maybe when we have a couple people who are in that process, we can share that information and expertise.
And also, we are having a ribbon cutting for our transitional housing building next Wednesday, September 3rd at 10 a.m. So y'all are welcome to attend. It is for the new building that's in front of the shelter. First floor is veterans transitional housing, and the second floor is just transitional housing for everybody else. So clients that are coming from the shelter, clients that are like finishing our residential treatment program but don't have anywhere to go. So just basic transitional housing that will include some case management support, some peer support, that sort of thing. So that it's 72 beds in that facility, 32 for veterans, so 40 available for everyone else. But as soon as that ribbon cutting is done, we'll probably add 30 or 40 bunk beds to the place. That's how we operate. So, but yeah, you're welcome to come. We're hoping it's a very brief ceremony, but we will have tours afterwards. So.
Really nice building.
Yeah. And if you can't make it and want a tour, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to show you around after that too. It is very nice. So.
Anybody else have announcements for the group? All right, hearing none, our next meeting is October 22nd here at the same location. Without Bruce being here to tell us, we'll consider ourselves adjourned.